The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
So I did not announce Ms. Berlin. Obviously, she's not here this week. She had told us the previous week that she would be traveling a little bit during the time that we might be recording, and that has come to fruition. So we are hoping she has a very speedy and safe ride back to her house in Ohio. So, Mr. Betcher, how are you doing, sir?
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Getting ready for spring break.
Spring break.
I remember last year's spring break was like the last time I was actually in the office regularly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was working at a client site and then they told us not to come back. And it was like, oh, okay. And then, I worked from home until I left my company at Leviathan and started my new company. Started my new job. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm hoping that I'll have the option if I want to go back into the office and, before the end of the year, but it won't be, I'm not going to be champing at the bit to do so if that's not necessary, because webcams are what they are. So cool. Well, I want to go ahead and get us started this week. I think we've got a very interesting discussion. This person spoke at my SeaSec East and SeaSec meetups that I have here in the Seattle area. Since we've gone into quarantine, the format has changed to completely virtual, where we have speakers every month. It is something that I am looking for speakers on a regular basis. We used to have 2 every month. Now we're down to 1 because I was like, it's really hard to find sometimes even 1 speaker, and I want to make sure that we have something for people to do. So we have a speaker who comes in, talks about a subject, and then we have kind of a post discussion afterwards. And this person joined us to talk about incident response communications I'd like to welcome Dr. Catherine Ullman to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Right on. All right. So, Catherine, please tell us a little bit about yourself, if you can, and how you got your start in incident response and security.
So my background, like many people coming into this, was sideways. My original degree is actually in the music industry, and I worked in that field for a while. And then I realized I had morals and ethics that precluded me from continuing in that field, and essentially left me looking for something else to do. And my dad had been doing computers most of my life. And so that was sort of like the next possible thing to look into. And I had a friend who said, you should do computers. And I said, oh, okay. And I wound up doing support. I did WordPerfect support on the phone for way too long, and then eventually transitioned into in-person support, and eventually was supporting both desktops and servers at the university level. And having done that for a number of years, I started looking at security stuff, because it was sort of the very, very early days of security. So back when, servers didn't have firewalls, because servers were really new, and it just wasn't even a thing. So from that point, it was really kind of when I started doing any form of incident response. There was a guy that I worked with who was starting to look at machines that were behaving strangely. I spent some time with him. He taught me a lot of the things he was learning from these early SANS courses. Back before SANS had like 504, it was like 3 and 4 and 5, like the class numbers were even that, like that's how long ago we're talking.
Wow.
And it wasn't too long before I moved into the realm of forensics, because I really wanted to understand that. And I started doing forensics part-time for the security office, kind of with 1 foot in each side. And then over time, they brought me in full-time, which really led me to more forensics and incident response stuff. So that's really kind of how I got to be where I am.
Nice. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is for those of you who didn't get to come to CSEC East and CSEC, and if you haven't had a chance to do that, you should come and do that. Incident response communications. And so there are no shortages of incident responses that have been in the news recently, whether you may still be working one right now if you have a large Exchange on-prem solution that you're dealing with, because there was a fairly weighty O-Day list that came out against Exchange due to the threat actor, I believe, by the name of Hafnium, that is causing and wreaking some havoc with folks. I believe Microsoft put out an out-of-band patch for that. I could be wrong.
Multiple patches.
Multiple, right? Multiple, multiple patches. So even I believe they even patched Exchange 2010, which they said due to defense in depth. So that just shows you that maybe Microsoft has enough metrics out there to realize that there's a ton of folks still using Exchange 2010, sadly, that they needed to patch something that is no longer in support. So, let's go from that scenario. So let's say I work at a large multinational organization and we have not fully embraced something like Office 365 yet, and Hafnium comes up. What's the first thing as a person other than panic should I be thinking about when we finally go, yes, that's a problem, we are going to consider this an incident? What are some of the things that a good organization with proper process should be thinking about when they activate the incident response team?
So you want to be thinking very much about how you're going to communicate with the various levels within your organization, right? I mean, you might be a really tiny org, but if you're talking about something, a larger organization that has a whole bunch of Exchange servers that a lot of people rely on, you better be prepared for messaging that goes in both directions. And I see that that's often forgotten, right? So you might see that messaging gets sent up a level, maybe 2, because the people above them might know something about this, and so therefore a message needs to go up. But it's not unheard of, especially given all the means of communication today, that the folks below them also are going to find out about this, right? Like, how often does this stuff make the news? All the time.
Right.
We see it now totally in social media. We see it in the daily, local news, which we never used to see before. So it's not too unusual for even your end user to ask questions about, like, were we impacted and what does that mean for me? And that may sound far-fetched, but I've seen it. And I've had people ask me questions about things that normally wouldn't impact them at all unless the service was unavailable. So I think the important thing is to make sure that you're preparing messaging in multiple directions. You need to make sure that you know all of the people that need to be involved in the conversation. So your stakeholders, whether they're internal, they're external, in this case, you probably don't need to involve law enforcement, but you might in other cases. So, be thinking more broadly. And, one of the first groups, especially in a different kind of incident where you're dealing with something criminal, you might want to get legal involved right away, right? To have those conversations. With something like this, while it can't hurt, there's nothing, unless you're talking about PR. If some kind of PR gets out about your organization, then you might need legal involved. So that's another piece of the pie that you're going to want to get involved. Your PR, your marketing people, sort of, as you move along. But that's where I would start, is make sure you know who all of those stakeholders are, and that you have messaging prepared for all these different levels. And you may not initially, you may know very little. So, you need to keep that somewhat close to the vest.
Right. Okay. So that's the TLDR. If you don't have an hour to listen to both of our shows, both of the episodes that we hope to have here, clear, concise communication is going to be key. I want to go back. So we call an incident response, and in order to create the proper messaging, though, we need to have necessary data. We can't just go, oh, we've been completely owned. So,
Right.
there's going to be two things that are going to split off here. Either it's, we found incidents or indicators of compromise, or this is an O-Day that could compromise our environment. Those are definitely different messages that you're trying to send. And because, especially since Hafnium is exchange based, a lot of the communication that you would do for an incident response may come from the same systems you're about to patch.
Right.
So, do you have any kind of, do you use templates, or do you use anything like, a status page, maybe on a website or something, or a wiki, or I mean, what are some of the other ways other than just email or a Zoom or something where you could get on that would be useful for this?
So I think you're spot on. You need to consider what we would call your communication channel, right? And each incident you deal with is going to have appropriate communication channels for different people. Your executive folks may insist on in person. Even in today's day and age, that in person may be via a Zoom because it's not truly in person, or depending on your org, maybe it literally is, we're going to stand outside and we're going to have that conversation. But you need to know your stakeholders. You need to understand what they're going to expect. It may come down to having those conversations completely out of band. You may need to pick up a POTS telephone, right? Not even VoIP, because the unified communication system could be involved here. So, you just have to kind of look at the particulars of the incident and say, well, maybe email is not a good choice. Maybe it is better on an intranet. Maybe it's better, if we weren't in COVID, maybe having a meeting with people, whether it's a large group or a small group. Maybe it's, snail mail. If it's something where, you really need to get information out and attackers could be in those traditional communication channels, maybe it's FedEx, or UPS or something. But you have to consider that. I think that's an excellent point, that it really is going to depend on what you need to communicate, who you're communicating with, and what kind of incident you're dealing with, for sure. And the joke that I make always, and tip of the hat to Chris Roberts, is lawyer approved carrier pigeons are always a good choice, because they'll get it there safely.
Right. So Mr. Betcher, it's hard to get a word in edgewise with you constantly talking over there. Have you had experience, sir, with trying to communicate these kinds of things with organizations in the past? I know you and I used to work at a particular organization where we did have one or two, close calls, but do you have any specific way that works good for you or for your organization with regards to communicating those outages or issues?
Typically, in the organization I'm in now, a war room will spin up, and then the incident response team has a template that they publish, and they will email details of the incident to whoever needs to be involved. Now, they also have documents that were done beforehand to instruct them on what type of incident is being handled and what kind of communication. As Kathy said, you may have to do phone calls, right, to executives, and they may have to make other decisions like that. We might need to get legal involved, and legal has been involved in the writing of the documents beforehand, just to make sure. Like, for example, if your CEO needs to have a press release, well, there is a canned press release already written and approved by legal, right? So he doesn't need to sit there and make it up on the fly.
Right.
And it's generic enough to where he could maybe change a few details and issue a press release if he needs to. So those are the kinds of things that you need to think about and have ready to go based on whatever type of incident you might have.
Right. Yeah. I think everybody's heard that canned release. Your information is very important to us. Nothing has been, deleted, nobody's gained access to customer data. We're constantly, looking, it's a sophisticated attack, something, and then, they figure it out later. Right. So,
Yeah.
That's the one they want to get out to everybody to kind of, lay fears, and then they can, go back later. Right.
Right. And you need some for ransomware. That's a big one, in case
Right.
all your servers are hosed, things like that.
Right.
Insider threats. What are some of the others? You could have a disaster recovery incident where your primary goes down and you have to fail over, and then you might have to basically have a list of people that need to be notified and how they need to be notified. So things like that, as well as customers.
Right. So Kathy, question: Mr. Betcher mentioned a war room. Who do you ever just invite? Is it everybody in the pool in a war room, or is there a good way of doing that? Because I took GCIH myself. They're 504. I'm actually very proud of how well I did actually on that, because for somebody who doesn't do incident response. But one of the things they were talking about was the person leading the response shouldn't be the one who's also maybe communicating that effort to people, because their job is to just work the incident. How important is it to define the roles in an incident? So things like, you're the incident commander, you're the person who's going to be talking to the CEO, but it's not necessarily the incident commander. How important is that for making sure the incident is handled well?
So it's funny you should mention that. One of the other talks that I've given recently has to do with incident response and firefighting. I've been a volunteer firefighter since 1997, so I've done this for a long time, and I've learned some things from being a firefighter that I think make me a better incident responder, and that's kind of the overall theme of that talk. But one of the things that I bring up in that is that we have a mechanism to manage incidents that allows for a lot of flexibility. And I actually bring up the fact that you want to separate when you can. You definitely want to separate those roles, because otherwise what happens is the person who's actively working the incident gets tapped on the shoulder every 2 minutes. Where are we? What's going on? As opposed to letting the incident person do the responding, right? They're actually nose deep in the logs or whatever, and they're getting the answers to the questions. And the person who's doing the communicating not only can facilitate providing that information, but they can also work with the folks who want the answers, right? And find out, like, here are the questions. So they can be working with the folks who want answers to get those questions to the person who's doing the actual knee-deep legwork. The incident response system, which is really the incident command system, which is what we see in the fire service, maps this out really well. And one of the things that that's actually something that I have on a sort of a future plan is to map the two, if you will, to show how one could be used in the other. I mention it in this talk, but it's something that I want to see later. And that's absolutely something I think is critical. I don't think you have to have people in stone where, this person does exactly this and this person does exactly that. But people, I think, have to understand in general what their role is, so that there isn't this constant interruption and the information can flow more freely, and the person can get each piece can get the job done, right? So the people who are looking at the servers, for if we're going to this Exchange example, and they're looking through the logs and they're running the tools to see, what they can see, isn't, because I know from personal experience, if somebody's constantly tapping me on the shoulder and I'm constantly being interrupted, I will never get the answers to any of these questions, much less any others that come up in my own mind.
Right.
So I think it's important for the folks on your team to have a sense of what their roles and responsibilities are in general. I don't think they need to be in stone. And the answer to your question about who's in the room, I think it depends on what room you're in, right? So in terms of a war room, you often have, Brian, I don't know what your experience is, but in my experience in a room like that, it's often middle and maybe sometimes senior management are having discussions about communications and how this is going to be handled throughout the external to the company or within the organization more generally. You have the people who are actually working the incident, and then somebody going kind of back and forth between them. You might bring those incident people in initially to tell what they know about it, right? Like they might come in and say, well, we know we have the version that is impacted. We know that these are O days, so there's no patches, or there weren't until today, but we haven't looked at all of the pieces yet, so we don't have more information. So you might start out that way where that person's there so they get a feel for what the other folks are kind of after, but then really they should be able to peel off and let the other folks talk about what else they need to know. At least that's been my experience.
I think the best ones that I've been involved in have had a situation manager. This person is experienced and technical, and they basically are the dictator of the incident. Whatever they say goes. And then in order to communicate with management, their manager, maybe their direct manager, is listening in on the call, maybe the only one asking that person questions. And then that person, the manager, relays to his management what's going on with the incident itself and some of the details going on. And then some of the higher level decisions are made on a different call, perhaps like a management call. And then the situation manager's manager is the liaison between the two, because he's more technical, or that person is more technical, maybe knows what the situation manager is doing, but doesn't have to interrupt him every 5 seconds, right? To say, what about this? What about that? Are you doing this? Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly where I'd be headed with the incident command system. So in a fire situation, you have a chief, right? You have a chief officer, and they're usually running the show, but you have incident, so they're incident command. They're the person in charge of kind of the whole shebang. But then you have somebody who is in charge of, say, one portion of the operation. So interior operations, right? And that person is only focused on what's going on the inside of the building, and they report to exterior operations, and then exterior operations is going to report to that incident commander. And so the incident commander is only worried about one or two people. So they're worried about, say, whoever's handling kind of immediate need stuff, and maybe, the incident, the folks who are working the incident on the outside of the building, they're not worried about everything else, because those people all report to that person. So it's a very similar idea.
Right.
Very cool.
And the situation manager, once that person gives commands to technical people who are maybe specializing in, okay, this person is, the incident commander may say, I want Bob to go just do forensic analysis on what we believe is patient 0, so go do that. And you just go do your thing. So he's basically directing people to do certain tasks. He's the task manager, basically, right?
Yep,
right.
Absolutely. Operations.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yep.
So each one, we've declared this is an incident, which means there's certain criteria that has to be created, or has to be, verified to say that this is an incident. Also, when an incident is announced or occurs, certain things like SLAs are put into place for compliance reasons. You may have to put out notification to people in a certain amount of time if there's a data breach or what have you. Who should be involved in making sure that these messages are written in such a way as to be informing people, but still not giving away all the crown jewels or information that could be used later on, either against you or with your organization?
So I think, it's certainly where we are it's a combination. It's a group effort that takes into account legal, because obviously there are legal implications. Our university communications team, because they're the ones who usually speak for the larger university as a whole, but we also have an IT communications group, and they'll work in tandem with the larger group. So they're used to sort of the more technical verbiage, and sometimes making that verbiage more easily understood by the masses, if you will, and then handing that off to university communications. So, for us, those are the predominant folks who are probably going to be creating that document, and the security office in some capacity oversees that. We'll check it for accuracy. Like if there's obviously something that is completely wrong, we want to make sure that information's not there. But in terms of who else is directly involved in the messaging, I don't know that we have anybody else who's directly involved in it, but certainly we run it by the executive level, because it's something that it often comes from, quote unquote, comes from them. The messaging in some capacity appears to come from them as a VP. So they're certainly asked, about it. Are you comfortable with this? But I think it originates in these groups. So like my manager or director would work with the communications and legal to make sure that initial information is accurate, and then it goes kind of up the chain from there.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to, I was hoping you were talking more along the lines of communications. Large organizations have a communications, internal communications group, or an external communications group, or they might even bring in a PR company if it's bad enough, to help, make that, either spin it in such a way, or to, make sure that the message is one that is, not completely doomsday or something. Because myself, I'm not good at communicating. Well, as you can probably hear me stumbling over these lines, but I probably would not be the person who would be involved in drafting these messages without having a lawyer, like you said, go through them, or PR, or, the social media team, if you will, when they tweet things out. So that makes a lot of sense. Do you believe that the shorter the message and the more terse the message is important, or should, is there some kind of way is there a way to massage it to, be the right size? I mean, obviously you don't want something lengthy, but too short, you don't get enough information. Is it more of a science than anything else, trying to explain without explaining too much?
I would almost say it's more of an art, right? So
Right.
There is definitely, it's tricky. As you mentioned, it needs to be, it has to have sort of enough information that it quells people's fear. So any sort of fear, uncertainty, doubt, we want to try to quell right up front. We don't want to provide any information that's inaccurate or incorrect. And we don't want to lead people astray, but we don't necessarily want to tell them all the nitty gritty, dirty details. Number one, we may not know them. And number two, it may not be appropriate. So, so certainly concise is important, but not so short that, you leave people sort of wondering, like, what happened and should I be afraid? And that kind of messaging, I think, is tricky. And there's definitely an art to it.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you tell too much, you may get caught in a lie, even though it might have been unintentional, right? What is an unintentional lie? I guess you're exaggerating, huh?
Or like lies to children, right?
Yeah. Or you may paint yourself in a corner, right? And then more questions come as a result. So yeah, it definitely needs to be well thought out.
Yeah.
Ahead of time.
It's interesting because I made that joke earlier about, oh, no customer data was it. It almost sounds like that they're trying to not stoke fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because the first few hours or days of a major problem can be very emotional. I would almost assume that there's kind of a grief cycle here where it's like, the first thing, a person like myself working the incident is going to panic. And then, we're going to start rationalizing things. And I would imagine the communication's the same way too. Oh no, this company got hacked. I'm not going to name names, SolarWinds, but it was all over the place and everybody was owned, and oh my God, the world's ending, and half these companies and all the governments of the world are, using this software and stuff. And then
Cyber Pearl Harbor.
Exactly. And so the messaging there had to be very succinct, I would imagine, and not trying to stoke whatever fears that people are automatically going to, like, oh my God, all these companies are going to be owned left, right, and center. I think I probably should go back and do a little homework on what the initial responses were to those findings, and to see how they massaged their messaging to make sure that they didn't, make it worse than already people were surmising. So it's that I definitely agree that there's an art to this, because it could bite you in the ass in the future. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's very telling, watching the Twitterverse, right? You get a really, really quick sense of this messaging was spot on. This was really, really well done. And there was not a whole lot of transparency. This was a disaster. What were they thinking? And certainly the security community comes together and they feel pretty strongly about this. And I tend to be one of those people who says,
right,
yeah, this was well done, or no. And that's tricky, right? I mean, again, being transparent, you don't want to put your foot in your mouth. You don't want to say too much, but you also don't want to give false information and lead people astray.
That was our show for this week. You can find show notes for this and all of our shows at www.breakingsecurity.com. You can also find an RSS link on the site to add to your favorite podcatcher. You can find all of us on Twitter. Miss Berlin can be found at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher can be found at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. We have a Slack. Come join us on our Slack. A lot of great things going on there. A lot of channels of various InfoSec-related subjects. You can get an invite on Twitter by emailing our official Twitter handle for the show at BrakeSec, BRAKESEC, or you can email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for their monetary assistance by offsetting costs involved in putting out a weekly show. Zoom fees, Libsyn hosting, domain purchase, renewal, equipment upgrades, time and effort building the community we have. We appreciate all of your help and support. If you'd like a t-shirt, stickers, coffee mug, or just to show your support for the show, you can check out our TPub site, www.tpublic.com/user/BDS podcast. We thrive on your feedback. A quick 5-star comment on iTunes or Google Play Store or your favorite streaming service, Spotify, Pandora, what have you, go a long way to gaining us additional visibility. It takes no time at all, and we appreciate your help in spreading the word. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Be safe, be well, be kind to one another. Take care of yourself because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.